All right, I see people joining us. Thank you. Good morning. So thank you for joining us. My name is Dylan Stern with the Delta fourth seminar in the Delta Research Awards seminar series. We have a very exciting seminar planned for you today, but we do have a schedule change according to the agenda that was distributed. So our second presentation that was going to happen with Renee Henry on the Reorienting to Recovery project will be rescheduled for a future date. And today's theme is collective action and co-production for integrated social ecological systems. Next slide, please. I'm going to go ahead and ask that folks add their name and affiliation to the chat while we're waiting for everyone else to file in so we can get to know everyone. Just wanted to say first Juneteenth. Juneteenth honors the end to slavery in the United States and is considered the longest running African-American holiday. So celebrating that today. Next slide, please. You will probably see the polls that popped up for the kickoff. Please help us out by filling that out. At the beginning, there will also be one at the end. Please take a second to fill that out as well. And the purpose is really just to continuously improve our events like these. And thanks for advance for doing that. We'll just wait another minute, I think, for folks to joining us. And just so you know, the seminar will be recorded and posted to the council's YouTube channel in case you want to share that with folks who weren't able to attend. And in general, we really want everyone to participate and engage in the discussion. So please add your thoughts and questions into the chat box, the Q&A box, or raise your hand and we can promote you to speak. Yeah, thanks for adding your names and affiliations. This is great. We will be adding questions to the Q&A box as soon as we decide to answer them live, and then everyone will be able to see them. Just another little minute here. Okay, well, yeah, so I guess we can jump right in. So thanks again for joining us. I'd like to, first of all, have Eva Sedaris and Megan Nguyen introduce themselves quickly. They are leading the seminar series effort as Sea Grant Fellows. Please go ahead and introduce yourself really quick.
Hello, thanks everyone for joining. We're super happy to have this today and in acknowledgement of Juneteenth as well. This is a special day for everybody, and I'm really glad that we all get to meet and learn from Dr. Takekawa.
Yeah. Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, my name is Megan Nguyen. I'm one of the state fellows here. Really excited to learn more about this project as well. I'll be here taking notes, so looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Megan. Really excited. This seminar is open to the public and will be recorded. The format is we have one presenter and we'll have about 30 minutes, possibly a little bit more to present. And then we'll ask him questions and there will be time for discussion at the end. Please chime in, add your thoughts and questions to the Q&A box. And yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over now to Lisa Marie. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dylan, Eva, and Megan, and our public participation team that's behind the scenes making this happen. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see so much participation online. And that screen is looking very big for me, but I think it'll be adjusted in a second. I'm thrilled to welcome you today to the seminar that's highlighting just one project, but a good one. And this is part of our series that focuses on outcomes from the Delta Research Awards from 2021. As Dylan already said, if you have not yet already done so, please introduce yourself and share your name and affiliation in the chat. And also, just to be clear, don't be shy about using the question and answer tab or the chat throughout the hour, because we really do like to hear from our participants actively in engaged way. So first, let me provide a little bit of background. I think it's my screen that's too bad. Yeah. So a little bit of background for the council and the Delta Science Program. So the Delta Stewardship Council, including the Delta Science Program, was created by the California legislature through the 2009 Delta Reform Act. And the Delta Science Program was charged with providing the best possible scientific information to help inform water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. One of the ways that we do that is by providing funding for scientific research in the Delta, and that's through competitive research calls like the Delta Research Awards. It's also worth highlighting that our science funding efforts work hand in hand with two key tools that we include down here at the bottom that you can see. One is the Science Action Agenda. It's a collaboratively developed tool and document that identifies management relevant research priorities. These talks that you're listening to were based on the 2017 Science Action Agenda, but we've updated that. And so the new call is calling on the new 2022 Science Action Agenda. The second is if you can see there, is the Delta Science Tracker, which is a web-based tool that inventories research projects across the Delta. And it's really there to promote communication and collaboration. So I highly encourage you to go in and poke around and see what's going on in the Delta and make sure that your projects are properly recorded in there as well. So next slide. Okay, as you can see here, we are in the fourth seminar of our series. And today's seminar theme is co-production for integrated socio-ecological systems. Typically, each seminar features 2 presentations on a shared theme, but today we have a slight exception to that rule, and there'll only be 1 presentation. So let me just take a minute to highlight upcoming seminars. As you can see, next week is going to be on harmful algal blooms, drivers, trends, and impacts. The following, then 2 weeks later is July 10th is on migratory fishes. The week after that is on multi-benefit wetland habitat and delta food webs. And so please consider joining us for those. And then also, if you can, spread the word so that we make sure that as many people know about these as possible. So next slide, please. Thanks. So I know we're going to get to what we're here for momentarily, but let me just again highlight other Delta Science Program efforts that you may be interested in or know folks who are interested in. So first, notices of intent for the 2025 Delta Science Fellowships are being accepted right now until June 24th. These fellowships are competitively awarded to early career scientists at the master's, PhD, or postdoctoral levels. And the focus is to conduct research in the Delta. Second, we're in the early stages of facilitating an update to the Delta Science Plan, which is a companion to the Science Action Agenda, and it aims to improve the doing of science in that system. And so what we're looking for is, we have developed and circulated an essay as a means of socializing a proposed approach to the next Delta Science Delta Science Plan, and we would love your feedback. So initial feedback is going to be reviewed starting July 12th, but please feel free to take a look and provide comments as soon as you can, and potentially pass if you didn't get a chance to do it by July 12th. Third, the council is organizing a Science for Communities workshop. This is something we're hoping to start doing every 2 years. This event will showcase projects created through partnerships between Delta community-based organizations and scientists, addressing topics this year in particular of air quality, harmful algal blooms, homelessness, and the human right to water. The event is in Stockton, and it's free and open to the public. So please consider joining us July 12th and also spreading the word. Thank you. So again, moving forward with today's presentation, today's seminar theme is on co-production for integrated socio-ecological systems. It's becoming increasingly understood that integrating social elements and community values into scientific research can help improve the impact and scale of a project's findings and improve the effectiveness of community decision-making. To that end, today's highlighted project contains significant social elements in its methods to foster collective action and community involvement for long-standing results that apply to diverse values. Today's presentation is by John Takekawa, who's coming here from the Suisun Resource Conservation District. Dr. Takekawa and his interdisciplinary team of scientists established an integrated pest management approach for Phragmites, or also known as common reed, an aggressive invasive plant in delta wetlands and globally. And the results highlighted social and cultural barriers to collective action for invasive species control and included communication tools for developing a regional strategy for common reed control. This research that the team did addresses the Science Action Agenda Actions 1, 3, and 4 specifically from the 2017 Science Action Agenda. And this project's key questions and findings will be summarized in an information sheet that will be available on our events page, the website, soon. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. John Takekawa and let him start his presentation. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Lisa Marie. I appreciate it. And thanks, Eva and Megan, for organizing this series of webinars that are very informative, and also Dylan for being host. And hopefully we can do a handoff here on changing slides, but we'll give it a try. So as you heard from Lisa Marie's introduction, this project is an integrating project between social and ecological research in an area I've never worked in before. So it's quite a change for me. And it required kind of developing a new team of partners to be able to handle this type of work. And so that is one of the things that I have done is, let's see, Dylan, oh, there we go. I work in Suisun Marsh and at the Suisun Resource Conservation District, which has been in the executive directorship of Steve Chappell for about 30 years now. And there's a lot of efforts here to benefit the private and public landowners, but especially the private landowners' interaction with the resource. And so it's something that it requires a lot of, I guess you would say, communication with people who aren't necessarily well-versed in ecological theory or background, and get a better understanding of what they would like out of their resource and how they're doing so, and whether we can help them achieve their goals as well as achieve goals overall for the ecology of the environment. I ended up having a partnership with a team to do this project, and that included Dr. Karen Kettering, and she's one of the probably North American, if not world, specialists in Phragmites, which we'll be talking about. The common reed, as mentioned by Lisa Marie. And her background is strong. We ended up meeting because I asked her out to present and talk to the landowners about this problem, invasive. And she was willing to do so, came out. And after that, I was saying, well, perhaps you can help us out here if we do get a project together. And when this project task came up, we decided we apply jointly. She had other contacts that we made, including with Dr. Zhao Ma from Purdue University, who is a social scientist, but also a natural resource ecologist, and has done this type of work. And Virginia Matzik, who is a chair at Santa Clara University Environmental Studies, who had done work in kind of these areas and had written about it. And finally, Rochelle Tanner was actually a former fellow underneath the Delta Stewardship Council, and she was working in the area on this topic. So we decided we would jointly write this project together to see if we could do something about looking at how the control efforts in Suisun Marsh could be benefited by understanding better the social kind of fabric of how people were looking at the issue, who are landowners locally, and how that related to both the public landowners and to groups like ourselves that are trying to help them. And one of the things we did was include postgraduate scholars in this to help us interact with the landowners, and it turned out to be really good. I was really pleased, and I think the landowners were too, with their chance to kind of tell their story to these new upcoming scientists. And it was kind of funny because the three postdocs, Adrian Ernst, Weiss Renani, and Gabrielle Keeler-May, all three of them got jobs in the middle of this. So all of them now have moved on to other positions. Adrian at Berry College, Weiss at University of Delaware, and Gabrielle at NOAA. But all of those positions are ones where they have carried the project on. So in essence, we actually benefited the project by having them going on to their future careers, but still working in this area on this topic. So really happy with that. And there has been a Fulbright scholar from Purdue, Teresa, who is helping us also with this work through Dr. Xiao Ma. So besides that, we had a whole crew of people that's worked from our groups. And again, this included Utah State University, Santa Clara University, Chapman University, and Purdue University, and especially the social survey parts. But in the field work, we helped to lead that with liaison efforts through Suisun RCD. So I just want to big thanks to everyone involved, especially Maggie, Rachel, and at the time, Louise Conrad, who helped get us going with this project, which is, I believe, the first effort of its kind underneath kind of this human dimension side of the DSC. So a paper that Louise wrote in 2023 kind of summarized a bit about where we've gone with invasive control. And one of the things that was pointed out in this paper was the part that it is really that there has been kind of maybe not haphazard, but efforts to do control of an aquatic vegetation has been done typically by one group or separate individual efforts, and rarely a centralized program. And we see this truly in Suisun Marsh as well. And so that setting these targets is something that could be important and helpful to also include social assessments of what's going on for planning purposes and to develop monitoring that makes sense for it, which really seems to be a problem in many of the studies of vegetation control, where you get people out treating, but the follow-up on trying to understand how and where the treatment has worked has been a lot less rigorous than as far as the treatment has gone. So Phragmites has been around for a long time in North America, and it definitely is something that includes an invasive type that came from Eurasia starting in the early 1900s, and certainly it's been distributed from east to west across the country. But there also is native types that occur in the areas. Now, the debate over this has kind of been waged over whether or not that occurs in this area, and I'll talk briefly about it and explain what our feelings are about the importance of this issue. But Phragmites has many unwanted effects when you're talking about structure of habitats. And it's especially poor for wildlife that like open habitats or areas where they don't have a solid forest canopy that basically this grassy plant causes. It basically closes out their ability to move through it, and that would include both fish and wildlife, as well as it's not necessarily the best of food sources. And it also tends to take a lot of water up in the system, and it can be a hazard with fire. So it is a plant that has several things that make it unfavorable to many managers. Now, there is a native historic plant that you saw on the previous slide too, distributed across North America, but the real worries have been since the invasive kind of spread out through the area. And the question is it matter? In the native or non-native, it's invasive, just like is cattail in the Midwest, which is controlled even though it's a native plant. So the term native or non-native doesn't matter. It's whether it's invasive and whether the goals of your habitat programs to develop the best habitats you want for a particular area is something that fosters control. And in the case of Suisun Marsh in the case of areas that don't want canopy coverage that's 100% in issues, it doesn't matter. The habitat managers want to manage to be able to create the habitats that benefit the species groups they're trying to do. So in this case, it really doesn't matter what type it is. It's interesting to know where it's located when there is natives involved, but the control efforts probably will remain the same regardless. So Phragmites management of Suisun is complicated both because it's one of the largest contiguous coastal brackish marshes in North America, but also that it has a mixed public and private ownership. And so the expansion became of great concern in the 1990s because it started to show up, and it has since then seemed to increase, but it really hadn't been well documented what that increase was about. So our study, we decided we'd look at both the biophysical sciences of some things we knew about Phragmites and Suisun Marsh, as well as the social science side of what we understood about how people viewed the problem, especially in the private landowner community, with relation to the public landowner community. So between those efforts, we wanted to put this together as trying to understand kind of some of the basics of things that we knew about or did not know about the plant, as well as what the people who were working to control the plant were thinking, and finally try to put that together to see if we can help improve decision processes that use both social and ecological science. So one of the first things we wanted to do was figure out, hey, how much is out there and how much has it changed? And this is kind of hard to do because it's basically historical ecology. We have to go backwards in time to try to figure out what was out there before and what it's coming to be now. So the other part that's hard to do is it's expensive. If you do imagery, you do a lot of work and analyses, it's not easy to do. So with that in combination, we initiated a study to look at some available imagery and see if we could track the change in the amount of Phragmites on the landscape in Suisun Marsh. So we use NAPE imagery, which is the North American Imagery Program of the USDA. And they actually take pictures across the country every 2 years. It's kind of an amazing program. And it's one that we can get the imagery for free. And so it's available imagery every 2 years. Now, the limitation is that it is only available for a shot that's taken in May to June in the growing season of agriculture. And so it has some limitations for natural resources, including, as I'll mention later, that Phragmites develops later. And so that Phragmites development is occurring in some years very well in this period. In other years, in drought years, it might be a little harder to get analysis to run. But we were able to use classification techniques, especially under random forest techniques, to look at the difference in the spectral signal of just RGB and infrared in these images. And in fact, there was a fairly decent signal when we used existing areas we knew about where the plants were. And we didn't use ground truthing directly in this study because we had definite areas where we had knowledge of where the patches were and what was growing. There's some of them that are very large and very easy to detect. And we use that in this case because it's going backwards, right? You can't go backward and go do ground truthing. It had to be done then. So we used it and we're able to come up with an approach that gave us about 90% accuracy when we looked at the actual classification methods. And so between those two, you can see in the top left, Phragmites shows up as a bright green line patch. In the bottom left, other plants are darker green or different colors entirely. And so we're able to do this with 90% accuracy to those test case plots that we looked at. So what we found is that through the years, there's definitely increasing sizes of the patches. We are getting more Phragmites, and the patch size typically goes from an area that gets established, and it happens. Let's see. Okay, in terms of the amount, you kind of go from a halo of a smaller patch that grows wider and bigger. And one of the earlier studies that has occurred in the Adirondacks indicated that once you get a big patch established, it's a real problem because it ends up that the patch is very hard to control at that point. So early detection, rapid response used in many invasive programs is really a key case here of trying to do that. So hence the part of trying to remotely sense when you're getting patches that are developing and trying to treat those early is one of the key features that probably can help control this plant from continuing to spread. But in general, the overall aspect of this is trying to look at the amount that we think has happened. And basically from the year about 2000, we had imagery. We could use some of them, not all of them, based on the color characteristics. And again, the type of year. Drought years are particularly bad. And we were able to look and find that, in fact, there has been like a 200+% increase in the amount of Phragmites in these marsh areas. And at the same time, there's been going on an extensive control program with the private lands and in the public lands occasionally with different periodic efforts. But in the private lands, it was a grant series that lasted almost 20 years from about 2000 on to 2018. And that was providing offset costs for the land owners to be able to treat their Phragmites with herbicide and other treatments that was provided to them. And so there was this supplemental funding to try to help control this plant. But yet, despite all this effort, it still was a large increase that occurred, and probably would have been larger had it not been for those control programs availability. So it was an interesting part that led us into this idea that, well, it's not just about, there's a lot of effort that has shown how to control things, and there are ways to do so. But it wasn't a clear path of how to go forward and do control as a region in Suisun Marsh for this plant. Also, we looked at the consistency of this results with what is a triennial survey of vegetation for the endangered salt marsh harvest mouse. And in that case, it's called the veg camp surveys. And those surveys had consistent responses, although they're much coarser on their resolution than we were doing with the NAPE imagery. So one of the experiments we want to look at is, well, can we slow this thing down? Can we talk to people about alternatives? And one thing that has been used in other parts of the US has been revegetation and trying to add other plants in to see if they can outcompete the Phragmites. And so to do that, we looked at areas that have been sprayed and treated with glyphosate, which is the primary treatment herbicide. And we looked at 3 different sites in different parts of the marsh and 10 patches in each of these sites. And we looked at planting mixes, and we called these different based on their ecosystem services of invasion resistant, salinity and drought tolerant, or waterfall habitat. So what did that look like? It looks something like this. Invasion resistant plants were ones that we felt were really aggressive growers that were either native or adopted, introduced. There are some of these that are not purely native plants, but they're kind of in the community and widely known to have existed here for a long time. Then salinity and drought tolerant species that tend to be able to handle high salinity levels, as well as be able to grow well in conditions that are dry. And finally, waterfall habitat that typically are those that produce seeds very well. And again, some of these are not native. They're ones that have been adopted and are used across the North America and a lot in California to provide food resources for species of interest, including water birds, waterfall and shorebirds and other species that adopt these type of habitats. So this turned into quite an exercise, more than I would ever think that it would cause. But because of the requirements of doing the project, we had to clear plots and try to do large enough plots to see a response. And we ended up, of course, working across the marshes in both the driest, hottest year in a long time in the start of the project, followed by one of the wettest springs in the latter part of the project. So we ended up doing a lot of wading, a lot of dragging, a lot of bringing crews out to the middle of a Phragmites patch in the middle of a marsh. That was challenging, and in the end, planting those plants to see if we can get a response. And you can see the map on the right is 1, 2, and 3 were the sites that we used across different areas of Suisun Marsh. So what were the results from trying to put plants in the ground from these different assortments that we call invasion type, waterfall type, salinity type, and how they do? Well, the actual percent cover of the types showed that the actual salinity and drought tolerant mix established the best. Well, kind of not surprising given how dry a year it was when we did the plantings. although the next year was very rainy. So this is something that we sort of expected this group would do the best. But in terms of what we didn't see was any strong benefit from having the Phragmites reduced by having revegetation. So if you look on this about the average cover, on the right is the unmowed controls. So those are just leaving the patch to grow right next to where we put our plots. But then we cleared the plots to put the plants in. And so those plots grew about the same as in the amount of Phragmites is if we put in revegetation groupings that we were hoping would outgrow the Phragmites, and the Phragmites wouldn't do as well in those conditions. So that was not a real high success as far as stability. Phragmites is pretty dominant and able to outgrow everything, and there wasn't much that could keep up with it, and especially possibly because of the drought year. And that's something that we decided to bring in the greenhouse to look at as well, trying to find out whether or not, in fact, that using the greenhouse, we could understand this a little better because of controlled conditions there, rather than the field drought year that we ran into, followed by really heavy rain year in 2023. So the effects of revegetation on growth, we did the same type of planting mixes, and the design was looking at the invasion level of with and without Phragmites, and compare that at salinity levels at low and high and in drought or saturated conditions. So with that, the waterfall mixture establishing it on the left is no Phragmites and the biomass that grew. And on the right is when it was invaded with Phragmites in the greenhouse. So we planted with Phragmites in the greenhouse and the differences between the two. And if you can see on the left with no Phragmites, it shows good growth by the different plants in the greenhouse, which is great, what you expect, with waterfall plants doing the best, followed by invasion-resistant plants, and then salinity drought-tolerant plants. So they do well across all seasons. They do okay. They're not the best growers if you have great conditions in a greenhouse. However, when you have Phragmites in the mix, there's a bigger difference. And it actually was that we had the waterfall plants were the ones that did quite well. And when you compare the blue bars and the kind of pink hued bars, when you had saturated conditions in the blue bars and low salinity in the light blue versus high salinity in the dark blue, the low salinity, as you might expect, they did better in lower salinities. In the drought conditions and the pink bars on the left-hand bars of the pairs, the drought conditions at low salinity did much better than the drought conditions at high salinities. Again, just showing that the conditions out there are having a major effect, and any climate change differences may end up being problematic relative to more invasion by Phragmites into the future. So one of the side experiments we did, and this was funded partially, let's see if I can go back one, Dylan. Partially because of the issue of that we're treating the samples over quite a long amount of time. And so we wondered if there was an issue with doing this in terms of the resistance potential that this may be having adaptation in the plants. And so this work was kind of spearheaded out of Santa Clara University with Virginia Matzik, and two of her students that got very interested in this, and they were able to get a grant in, which again, we complemented a lot of the funds for this project with grants. And here's patches that were selected. We wanted areas of wetlands with at least 5 good patches that we could sample seeds in. And we did high intensity wetlands where we knew they were treated a lot under that program I mentioned in the past 10 years, and low intensity areas that were treated with a little bit of herbicide in the last few years. So we wanted to compare those two just to see if there was any obvious differences between how the plants developed in those areas. So this required collecting the seed heads and doing work with the seeds, but measuring the patch size, measuring across these patches to get a general idea how big they were relative to how well they were producing, and looking at the density of the seed heads, and then finally processing these. I think the undergraduate students probably didn't quite know what they were getting into when they volunteered to do this as a great experience, and spend a long time trying to weigh these little teeny seeds both stripping the plant, the heads and then weighing and counting all the spikelets, which I'm sure they never want to do again in their lives. So the main thing is that we were able to see if these plants had kind of the same effects with or without the treatments, or at least low and high treatment of control efforts with glyphosate. And so it's by trying to get an idea of the growth, we're looking at how many seeds there were in any particular spikelet, how many spikelets there were in any particular inflorescence, and then how many inflorescences we were found in an average square meter, and then finding out how big were these patches and how much that related to the pressure of the threat of invasive species that would keep the cycle growing. And you remember those rings that were growing out, that's what really we were looking at here in terms of the Phragmites in the wetlands. So in this graphic, it's simply looking across the sites at the bottom axis, across the different areas that we did studies on the ones that had low or high herbicide treatment. And the pressure is seeds per meter squared, right? And we looking at that. And with that, the final answer was that, yes, Phragmites made less seed and had fewer inflorescences when you had longer term control going on. So we had, again, higher historical herbicide use. We had less seeds produced per marsh meter squared, and that would be about 1,200, where we had almost 5,000 seeds per meter squared when there was less herbicide use. But patch side really was deciding this. So it was whether or not that you were able to use more herbicide, you were chipping away at the patch size. And in fact, when you had low herbicide use, oftentimes it was related to this patch size. So that was, at least there were some differences here that we were able to detect. But the big question was, is there any indication that herbicides becomes less effective and it is affecting the plants and they are able to adapt and survive better over time? And we actually were pleased to see that the answer was no. We don't really see evidence of herbicide resistance developing the Phragmites from the heavily treated areas compared to the low treated areas. So this is, again, after the fact, not a controlled experiment in the greenhouse. This is out in the field. We ran the regrowth and germinations in the greenhouse from the plants that were brought in directly from Suisun Marsh sites. And so this is something that you at least can take a look at this, and kind of a novel idea that Virginia and her crew came up with to look at this. So we talked a little bit about the part of the biophysical sciences. Now I mentioned a bit about the social sciences and how we tried to integrate this in to the study and discussion of what we should do moving forward in control of invasive Phragmites. So we wanted to talk to people and ask them what they thought of what was going on with Phragmites, how it affected their valued system relative to what was growing there, and trying to get different groups to speak up and talk about what they were trying to do and use for control of the thing of the plant. So this is a particular design used in social science, a mixed methods research design, doing very specific individual interviews, and then doing observation practices, and then a census, a widespread inventory by going through and doing questionnaires with landowners. And I was very pleased to find that our landowners were willing to do this, despite the fact that everybody hates things coming in the mail and questionnaires. They recognized it as that it was an effort to do better in terms of invasive management, and they were willing to do it. So I give high credit to the landowners for standing up and trying to participate in this. In terms of overall, we had interviews, and the specific landowners, we did an assortment of ones we want to target, the different big landowners, small landowners, big marshes, small marshes, and intermixed, and picked certain people to talk to, including private landowners, DWR, DFW, state agency people, ourselves, and NGOs, right, that we tried to get interviews with that were done by Purdue University and their social science group. And the brief summary of this showed that actually they found a lot of shared values. That was, people really want to create beneficial habitats no matter what angle of the compass they came from. And especially for waterfowl overall, people understood that that had been a historical value here with wetland areas managed for waterfowl since the 1880s. So you're talking about 150 years of management for waterfall, and it is one that is well known in the Pacific Flyway to be done. So overall, both public, private landowners, land stewardship, it was very important to people. They want to improve the wetlands and improve the conditions, no matter if they're private or public, and they want to consider collective action. So that was really something that they were receptive and open to, the thought of trying to work together. And one of the parts that is new to me relative to the social sciences is this idea of trust. You trust certain things, then you will work with that effort. And one of the big ones had been that government involvement is not something that private landowners necessarily are enthused about. And so they dislike larger involvement. They have a distrust of that. But affinitive trust with shared values, it turned out that local level reclamation districts or a conservation district like ourselves, we actually could engender more trust and ability to work with groups. So we could spearhead the linkage between the higher level government groups and the local private landowners better than if you were trying directly from the higher level groups. It was just a matter of background and trust. So we're trying to set about and complete the final surveys, which is looking at these relationships among what people think about these areas of interest, how to look at collective action, how could we move forward with this, and basically try to find out what owners would prefer. And so we are hopeful that this is being released now for the final, and then this will go into the next year, which again, we delayed a year, both because of COVID and other reasons, to extend this study. And so that we will be finishing this up with this final survey that the landowners have agreed that they would participate in. So the last couple parts of the last part of the social aspect is how do we communicate with people and do a better job of trying to frame this problem so people talk to each other. And so we looked at this as far as through Chapman University and Rochelle Tanner's work of looking at how people think of problems and problem solving together. In the case of kind of more of a theoretical approach, it's called framing theory, and there's looking at different sciences of social sciences of how you have these trusted messengers, people will talk to interact, how cultural values are influencing their thought processes, and how community levels solutions are engendered, how we could get that to happen. So again, trusted messengers, really interesting. How do these positions come to be? How do they get used? And it typically is that there's shared values in backgrounds in different ways, that there's moderate management power. So there is an ability to help. It's not you're completely helpless in the particular group you're working with, but low regulatory power, because that then crosses you up with you are regulating the people at the same time you're trying to get them to work with you. So that is something that was interesting to hear, and I didn't realize that has such a big influence. And in personal value statements on doing those kind of interactions, one of the things that Rochelle's group at Chapman was able to say was they were able to find out that really in top values, it was surprisingly more about conservation, protection of the resource, stewardship of the wetlands, responsibility for taking care of them. In finances, how much it costs, economic benefits. Sure, everybody wants to save money, but it really wasn't the main discussion point they had to talk about. It was the top values were not that. So I think that was an interesting revealing fact that maybe on an agency side, you might think is more of a driver for a private landowner trying to manage a wetland. It isn't as much that. They'll put their money into their efforts if they feel it's going to the direction that they want for protection, stewardship, responsibilities. And so this is on the, by the way, on the graphic above, it's just a ranking system of how they found people ranked the values of the different efforts. So the stakeholders have to be treated individually to understand and appeal to their cultural background, both in terms of the benefits of financial benefits, as well as looking at their background and what they know about the plants. So the suggestion based on these studies of communications was it really would be better to keep doing invasive training. There's a lot of general knowledge and people believe there's issues, but the real definitive knowledge isn't that great. And one interesting part that Rochelle's group came up with is that there's lack of intergenerational planning, and there's a lot of turnover in people who tend to be private landowners. They're at the end of their careers, and this is something they always want to have, a private area they can go in a wetland and sit and listen to the birds and watch them fly in without a bunch of people around them in a public area. And they do so, but the fact of them turning it over to the next generation in their particular private land ownership is not something that has been really well worked out or is very consistent among different landowners. So that was an interesting part that they ran into. And that makes it harder to have a consistent control program too, if you don't have a lot of people who follow on and do the same thing over time. So how do we integrate this? How do we put this together? And part of the thing is looking at a particular tool called the spatial prioritization. So we can pull these social understanding into the ecological framework of what we're trying to do to control invasive plant. And so in this case, what we did was look at whether or not we could optimize the resource allocation, because you never have infinite resources. Target high risk areas by understanding on the landscape where were the problem areas and how we could probably get people to work together on those areas and inform the adaptive management of those areas. So this is kind of a general graphic looking at this, and basically spatial prioritization models are done by taking kind of a general scope of the area, and then in interpretation, looking at how particular areas would be the best to work on based on the combination of social understanding of what people want to work on or could work on or would work on, and what we understand about the ecology of the area. So this is something that had been done, led by Gabby at Chapman University, to develop a particular approach to the model. And we combined the biophysical information some of you heard of today and the social information of trying to understand both where wetlands were private and public and how the people interacted with each other's amongst those areas. And so basically what we're trying to do is get the interaction or putting in the social understanding of what people will do into weighting a model of where you should do the work. And so this is kind of an initial cut into trying to do a joint control program for a region, for Suisun Marsh, for this particular invasive, and trying to find out. And so if you looked at just the ecological knowledge from the work that was done by Jason Hagana in that first analysis of spatial things, you can see where the Phragmites is, but it doesn't mean that you can tackle it all over all those areas. It's pretty much impossible financially. But if you can focus it down and find out where you should prioritize because you add in those social benefits, then this is just a first cut at this. The spatial priority model includes the social information of where there's a great interest in doing it, whether it's in fact a public area that has restoration going on. And because of that, we want to control the invasive before you add in tidal flow and have it restored, or other areas that are really specific to a particular combination of private public landowners or a particular reason that we want to work together in a certain area. So I'm hopeful that, with this kind of a presentation, it's an idea that we can learn a lot by talking more closely about what people are thinking about relative to a process like controlling an invasive species. And right now we have Phragmites as on the landscape for quite a while. We recently have Russian thistle is another invader that's very quick and has a lot of people concerned and trying to work on its control. But we might be able to follow the same type of approach of trying to have joint work done between public-private owners and differences among different groups to try to come to consensus about things that will actually work to benefit the control efforts. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of a summary of where we've been with this project. I'm really, again, pleased that we were able to form this partnership with groups that typically don't work together. That was part of the exercise of it. And I compliment the Delta Stewardship Council for supporting science for funding where it's needed. And this project wouldn't have been funded without their efforts. And I think that it's an example of where targeted funds it's really helpful to have those from entities that are involved in management, because it directs it to be applied so it can actually be used on the landscape. And I hope we're able to do that. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Takekawa. You have so many questions coming in, so thank you for wrapping it up. This looks great. And so let me just start by just commending you on the integration of these different tools and perspectives. It's just really unique and incredible. You had a couple clarifying questions just really quickly.
Sure.
In the experiments, what do you mean by low and high salinity? What's the PSU or the salinity range you're using?
Yeah, so we were using millisiemens per centimeter, and it was like 6 or 12. So it's part of the range we see at Suisun Marsh. And sometimes it goes way high, especially in the fall. So seasonally, you'll get much higher salinities in the fall. And this, again, most everyone, it's funny, I worked a lot in the Bay proper, and everybody goes in usually parts per thousand. And you talk about that, but in Suisun Marsh, it's all by what is being read on the meters. And basically it's millisiemens per centimeter, which, as you know, is not constant based on temperature, but it's sort of just a relative range that helps people know, well, actually, if we add water to leach salts out of our system right now, we're just adding more salt. But below that level of maybe 8 millisiemens per centimeter or 12, somewhere in that range, below that level, we're actually helping to leach salts out of the system, and the plants will grow better when we do that.
Great. Another question was, what explains, this is from Denise Columbano. What explains the higher increase in percent increase in managed wetlands versus the tidal wetlands for the not, she was looking at, let's see.
Yeah.
She was, yeah.
Some of it has to do with the age of the areas, and the fact is that when you have some of these tidal ones, they're newer ones, there certainly are concerns that the newest restoration projects are occurring are having really quick and extensive invasion that is increasing the amount of habitat. And part of the issue is there's a limitation on what you can do in these areas because of the listed species concerns. And so there's a problem on restoring an area, having invasives come in and be able to do anything about it. And so that is a real upcoming issue, and one that I think there's a lot of concern about what can be done. But in terms of over the time period of this project, it was something that we looked at the expansiveness. Certain places within the marsh are, the Phragmites grows better than others, and certain places have had less opportunity for control. But I guess overall, I would say it's a fairly consistent amount where when we do isolate down to those who have done more control, those have put more effort into it, they actually have shown that they reduced any kind of increases, and some of them have zeroed it out. So if depending on how much work they put into it, the managed wetland where the landowners are doing work, they're doing quite well. Those that are private and don't do work on the properties, they may have quite a problem on having expansion across their properties. So it's sort of a difference on individual differences on who's doing the management.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I'll just go with a question that I had that had been brought up before, which is the transferability of this. I'm struck by that framing theory approach, and then also the idea of building trust. And so I'm curious where else do you think in the Delta we could use these techniques that you're working on to address ecosystem management?
So I guess I have to be careful stating this, because it's almost like I felt when we were starting to do this work, we're patting ourselves on the back, because a lot of it came down to trust of the local district. And I think looking at it now, I can be a little more objective. Again, I came from a big federal agency. I understand the relationship between people's thoughts of big government relative to local land ownership and who they talk to and who they work with. And I think that's a true thing. I think there's a place that people supporting conservation districts and local reclamation districts and people on the ground working through that as an intermediary has a positive potential most everywhere. If you drop in from a large agency, Department of Water Resources, federal agencies, and you come in and try to say, we really should do this, despite having maybe exactly the right intentions and the right directions going forward, you may not be getting cooperation because you're not a trusted entity. You don't have that trust, but the people who are there day to day on the ground locally, maybe they don't have the resources, but if you'd work with them, they oftentimes may have a better linkage to the community and local people's involvement in doing something jointly. So, it's our hope that we can help spearhead things for Suisun Marsh because of our position, but at the same time, work directly with the agencies, understanding that some of the science findings are critical and really important to try to implement, as well as acquiring the funds with them to be able to pull it down to the local level, to be able to enact control programs like what we're suggesting here.
You have a question that just came in from Rachel
Sure.
Kloppenstein,
Oh, yeah.
which is a great work, team. Are the results from the biophysical studies being integrated into the July 2024 survey questions for landowners? And then if so, how?
So, so this is being produced by Purdue as Jean Ma's the lead of the particular survey work. There's some of it's in there. A lot of it, I guess, again, this is not my specialty area. So when I read the questions, they're trying to get, there's certain sets in these surveys that are like repeated sets of questions to get at underlying understanding of what people are thinking, even how to describe it. I think this happens in a lot of survey techniques of trying to repeat things in a different way to try to really feel out what people are thinking or saying. And so some of the initial results we're showing on the science we produced and presented in terms of local landowner meetings and talking individually. But I don't know that much of it will really get into the survey as much as kind of more the gist of it's kind of higher than level than that on the understanding of what people are willing to do and how much they would willingly do collectively in action to help control invasives. So it's in there, but it's not like in detail. We're going to put, a specific measure that we got on one of those graphics that I presented earlier. It will be more kind of a general overview of we might be able to do this or this. What do you think? And get the perspective from the on the ground.
That was a good answer. Let me open the screen. I'm going to turn this over to the last question. I think will be from Eva.
Oh, great.
It's a good question.
Oh, hi. So I am new to understanding how waterfowl interest groups like hunters and birders are involved in conservation and habitat management. And I know that hunters in particular have historically held like a stronghold on that. So can you please explain how waterfowl hunting has a role in land management for private and public holders, I guess, with in reference to Phragmites management and conservation?
Yeah, I think in the bigger sense, of course, national wildlife refuges were established basically by waterfowl hunting as an American tradition, and the efforts of understanding that is a big topic that it probably will extend far beyond the time I can have here. But I would just say that there's opportunity there because it's typically been one of the biggest funded efforts, right, in terms of having people that care about the resource that they're involved in their sport and put funds into the management of the habitats to do so. In the case of the private landowners, which, there's certain places that it's more public lands than private, but in California, there's a lot of public land and Suisun marshes, particularly been started as a public areas where the private landowners went to the state and said, you need to protect this. And we will work with you to do so. So it was really funded by the private landowners to protect Suisun Marsh, working with the state legislatures who agreed with them and were able to get bills passed in the 70s. So I think the biggest point here is that, as you saw from the perspectives that they were able to show for landowners, that people cared about stewardship, conservation, the broader topics are there. The sport is overriding, and that's pretty typical as far as that's why they put their money into these areas, is to have their sport. But I think that if they see that they're going to lose the conservation of the area, they'll lose their sport because Phragmites takes over and makes an impenetrable wall of habitat that is closed habitat, their particular species won't occur there. And again, some of these things, we started to control our environments a lot where we've altered how things come in. And in terms of invasive Phragmites coming from a different place and coming into an area with a lot less competition that it might have had in Asia, it's a different story, and you end up having to fight it with whatever techniques you have to improve management so you get your preferred values, or the values that you are hoping to obtain to happen. And so I guess overall, I would say that it's the participation is something that has been really good in general, and it's because people care about the effort, the areas that they have put their money into individually. And I do think that if you compare the value of what it would cost to have all this be public land instead of private and public, I think it would be unaffordable for the state of California to manage. And so it's an interesting thing when you have these partnerships of trying to get it so that you recognize that part and also help the private landowners do the best they can to make it so that they are managing for the most diverse habitats, and at the same time kind of looking at areas of what they do best. And in the case here, it's a really great area for migratory waterfowl in the Pacific Flyway and migratory birds, and it's something that has been historically done for over 100 years.
Thank you. That was so interesting. And I think you do a
You're
really
welcome,
good
yeah.
job at representing these different groups in this really interdisciplinary way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we can continue some of these these answers. I'm going to transfer the moderator role to Dylan Stern. And thank you so much. I see Zhao Ma is in the chat, and I think Dylan can take over from here.
Yep. Thank you so much, Lisa Marie. And so Dr. Ma has offered to chime in here, and just want to open the floor in case you want to add anything. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. I will be quick. John is our fierce leader. So whatever he said, actually, he did a really good job explaining the integration of biophysical understanding of the landscape to the design of the landowner survey. I would just add 2 more points. Well, I guess 3 points. One is the survey was designed by the social science team, but with a lot of input and help and love from our ecologists and managers and water managers in Suisun. So the questions are really heavily vetted and pilot tested with landowners. So that's one thing. The second thing is about specific questions that we asked on topics related to past practices people have used to control invasives, the potential programs they might be interested, or approaches they might be interested in adopting, or some kind of restoration options they might have might be available to them that they might want to consider. So all of those sort of the more technical side of things, ecological side of things, were actually directly taken out of the biophysical portion component of the study, right? And were really input from our non-social science colleagues on the team. The last point I would make is, if we think about the integration, right, of this entire project, we do have a plan after the social science survey is conducted, the data comes in, and we will be able to also spatially spatially assess the social science data. And then the next step is kind of putting the spatially explicit social science data with a landowner data with a spatially explicit biological, biophysical, and ecological data, and then identify potentially, for lack of better word, hotspots for some of the opportunities for intervention and collective action, right? So really sort of the integration of social and ecological research really happens throughout this entire process, from the design, the proposal, to survey design, implementation, to, later on when we have results back and trying to make a more comprehensive understanding sense of the landscape, the social and ecological landscape. Okay, yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Looking forward to that. We do have one more question that came in from Shoko. I'm curious about the framing theory and why other parameters like social norms weren't included. There's quite a bit of evidence in other systems of the effect of social norms. For example, seeing neighbors with solar panels may influence whether people invest in solar.
I don't know that I can address this very well. It's something that Rochelle Tanner probably would have to address specifically about the other aspects of the framing theory. I guess the parts that as you see from what Zhao just talked about in terms of there are other underlying parts that were done through the process of just talking to people and having groups get together and individually finding out things of what seem to be the most important ones to discuss. And so I would probably have to defer to Rochelle to talk about what other things were presented or were discarded or kept, depending on how the initial kind of discussions went with landowners. It was interesting to have them. Now, Rochelle was here, but others like Zhao and others had to parachute in from other parts of the country to do this work at this area. And so the education was very quick. And I'm impressed at how well they were able to understand basically the nature of at least how management was done here in the community, because as everyone knows, the Bay Delta by itself is a whole country unto itself on complex interactions. So I think that it's part of that question of what you really have to look at. There are certain things you have to limit down to, and I think Rochelle had to do that and did do that.
It looks like we also have Dr. Ma volunteering to help us out here.
Good.
Sorry, it's just so exciting, all these questions, and I can't help myself. So about Shoko's question on social norms, that's definitely a very important factor. I think Rochelle incorporated that into her communication piece, but it's also a key factor that we're evaluating kind of on a broader landscape with all the landowners beyond just its role in communication. And from our studies on invasive plant management in other parts of the country, in other contexts that may not be managed wetland, it has been shown in my own research group's work how important social norms are, right? If other landowners are doing or thinking about something, then I would feel more obliged to engage. The situation in Suisun is very interesting, right? Because there's our private and public landowners in the same place. So a lot of these social norms type of situation could backfire because when we talk to landowners around the marsh, people were saying, oh yeah, some landowner, they do feel the sense of social norm. If they see their neighbors are doing something, they feel obliged to do something. But then they would point finger to say, oh, this landowner are now doing something, or this landowner is bigger than me and they're not doing what they're doing, or this landowner is public and they are not doing something, therefore I shouldn't feel obliged to do something, right? So social norm is a really interesting dynamic concept that we're trying, and we know it's important. We already know for sure it's important in Suisun, but we're trying to see how social norm also intersect with some other variables such as stewardship values, trust, past experiences, and a few other things, right? Because it's a little bit more complex than other studies contexts I'm used to when, it's all private landowners, right? In this case, there's also a lot of other factors are playing into the extent to which social norms motivate or demotivate people to engage in collective action.
Yep, great, thank you. Really appreciate that. I'm not seeing any other questions come
I see a comment from Rachel, and I just want to thank Rachel for helping to manage the contracts. That, again, no fun for a lot of you guys, but we appreciate and understand it, is that, to get these bucks on the landscape, you pitch for it and try to help to get our applied studies going. And in the case of the spatial prioritization model, my hope is that by incorporating this, we may be able to get to a plan for the region, which has never been discussed really, on how to do invasive control in a unified way that lets the public managers interact with the private managers and see what each other are doing. And for now, it's completely like separate. And it very rarely is there an interaction of discussion of we're both going to work over here and you're going to do that, I'm going to do this. And maybe with the spatial prioritization, it'll help to go, oh, we really need to work over here because you've got this public area that isn't controlled right next door to the private area that they're working like crazy to control. And it's sort of creating animosity when you don't have a unified approach. And so my hope is that the spatial prioritization will, in a kind of a way that's open and using scientific information, will direct some of these discussions to allow some better collective action.
Very cool. So those are next steps, right?
Yes, that's exactly the hope. If we finish off to the end of this and keep it going, I hope, on efforts to control it with everyone working together, or more so than we have.
Yep. And thank you for acknowledging the contracting difficulties. It's always, it's always a challenge, but thanks for sticking with us. And we really want to see the science happen, and really proud of this project in particular. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that'll wrap us up, actually. Thank you, Dr. Takekawa, Dr. Mao for chiming in as well. Yes, shout out to Maggie as well. Please fill out the exit poll. Take a second to do that. And just wanted to highlight that next Wednesday, you can also tune in to our next webinar that's going to be showcasing our harmful algal bloom projects. So please come back and check those out. Again, thank you so much for attending and your participation and engagement. Really great discussion. Really appreciate it. And yeah, and then we do have 2 more sessions to go after that. And yeah, just keep coming back. We'd love to see you back. Thanks.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.